feel the NDP is in true peril if you guys don't do a single-payer pharmacare program like they want?
No, look, we have been able to successfully cooperate with the NDP on a whole range of issues. We're continuing to have conversations with regards to pharmacare legislation. It's something that's in SACA, and we want to be able to move forward on that. But no, I think the relationship with the NDP is strong, and I feel confident we'll be able to move forward.
Êtes-vous prête à accepter que l'assurance médicalement soit comme les délégués du MPD, comme le caucus veut?
Bon, ça, c'est une question pour le ministre de la Santé, parce que moi, je ne suis pas le lead sur ce dossier, mais mon travail, c'est vraiment de travailler avec le NPD dans la Chambre pour avancer les priorités que nous avons ensemble.
Prenez-vous la menace au sérieux? Prenez-vous la...
À Gaza, par exemple. Est-ce que vous croyez la version israélienne ou est-ce que vous croyez la version du Hamas? Qui est responsable, vous croyez?
Bon, c'est important d'avoir les faits sur ça. Je crois que je vais réserver commentaires jusqu'à moi, j'ai les faits. Mais ce que je vais dire, c'est que c'est une tragédie énorme pour les civiliens de Gaza. Chaque vie qui est perdue dans ce conflit, soit d'un Palestinien innocent, soit un Israélien innocent, c'est une perte énorme. Alors, pour le moment, je ne vais pas faire un commentaire jusqu'à nous avons le fait. Yeah, I mean, first of all, look, I mean, it's an immeasurable tragedy that has happened. Any life lost, whether it's an innocent Palestinian or an innocent Israeli, is a tragedy and is one too many in this conflict. But I will reserve comment in terms of assigning blame until we know the facts on the ground. For the moment, all I can say is my heart goes out to the victims because it's an incredible tragedy and any life lost is one too many.
Qu'est-ce que vous pensez des gens de votre caucus, des libéraux demandent de cesser le feu?
Nous sommes une partie avec des opinions diverses, mais ce que je peux dire, c'est que le gouvernement du Canada croit fortement dans le droit de défense d'Israël. Ce qui est passé le samedi, il y a 2 samedis, c'était un acte de terrorisme. Le Hamas, c'est une groupe terroriste. Et ça, c'est sans doute, mais quand même, notre position comme gouvernement du Canada, c'est toujours de limiter la perte de la vie civilienne. Merci.
Et des municipalités d'offrir une protection à tout le monde qui se sent menacé.
Pourquoi ce communiqué parlait seulement des Juifs?
Écoutez, c'était dans les moments qui ont suivi l'attentat en Israël, mais le gouvernement, le premier ministre, moi-même, Mme Joly, nous avons reconnu le besoin de donner une protection accrue et de reconnaître l'inquiétude qui est partagée par toutes les collectivités. Et d'ailleurs, c'était le même après l'annonce du premier ministre quant aux allégations en ce qui a trait à M. Nijjar en Colombie-Britannique. Des communautés à ce moment-là, sikhs comme hindous, nous ont parlé de leurs inquiétudes. Alors, on est au travail dans toutes ces sens.
Poser la question, ce que vous pensez de la réaction du gouvernement face à la situation au Moyen-Orient? Est-ce qu'on n'est pas assez critique peut-être d'Israël?
Écoutez, je vais me limiter à dire un peu ce que la ministre des Affaires étrangères a dit, ce que le premier ministre a dit hier.
Mais je veux savoir ce que vous pensez.
Ce que moi, je pense. Moi, je pense que c'est une situation extrêmement complexe. Je pense qu'il faut absolument préserver les vies humaines.
Devrait-on ask you about the situation in the Middle East? Do you think the federal government, the Canadian government, should be maybe a little bit more critical? Ah oui, excusez-moi.
Est-ce que le gouvernement devrait hausser le ton?
Oui. On doit nommer des choses clairement. Maintenant, il y a une guerre. Il y a des civils qui sont tués actuellement dans le ballon de Gaza. Je ne connais pas les chiffres actuels, mais je pense... C'est quoi les chiffres actuels? Combien de personnes ont été tuées à ce moment?
4 000, 5 000.
4 000. Donc, si on divise 4 000 entre 2 millions de personnes, ça va être 1 sur 500 personnes qui ont été tuées actuellement, des civils qui habitent à Gaza. OK?
Should Canada call for a ceasefire?
Mais juste finir votre pensée. Donc, Ça veut dire quoi? Qu'est-ce que le gouvernement canadien devrait dire?
On doit nommer ça.
Et nommer de quelle manière?
C'est à cause de le bombardement that is falling on the heads of babies, of elderly seniors, of women and children, boys and girls, and yes, innocent adults who are both men and women.
But the Canadian government is not saying that. He's not saying Israel should maybe refrain from doing this, is it?
Do you think Canada should call for a ceasefire?
We have to see that this stops. This is not acceptable.
So should the government call for a ceasefire?
I am a member of the governing party.
But what do you think?
Are you satisfied with what's being said?
I think we have to recognize clearly that bombs are falling on innocent children, adults, seniors, being launched from the Israeli military. We need to recognize that.
But the Prime Minister, are you saying the Prime Minister isn't recognizing this? Because he is talking about
I'm not saying that, no.
But what should Canada do?
The day before yesterday, the Prime Minister gave a 12-minute address in the House of Commons. And he said clearly that international law must be respected by each and every party, including Israel. There are Geneva Conventions. I myself was a soldier in the Canadian military. I was trained in the Geneva Conventions. There are rules to war.
Do you think Israel's breaking those rules?
I know that civilians are dying.
Do you think Israel's
And
responsible?
if I was behind an artillery cannon and I knew this would fall on hospitals and schools, I would not push that trigger.
So you believe that Israel launched the attack on the hospital yesterday?
I'm not saying that attack, but there have been about 20 hospitals that have been hit during this strike. This war, butchery, is what it is.
Comment vous qualifiez l'idée d'un cessez-le-feu? On veut comprendre votre pensée.
I think we have to ask Canadians that question. We have to understand the numbers that we're dealing with. 1 out of 500 people. When are we going to stop this? Look at the House of Commons. If you have one member killed out of that chamber, how will this chamber, this country, react?
But how do you stop it if one side stops bombing but it doesn't actually end the conflict? How does that solve the problem?
Sorry?
If one side stops bombing, how does that solve this conflict? How does that end it I mean, it might end it today. Does it end it for all time?
I'm not going to claim to have the grand solutions, okay?
Vous avez dit qu'il faut...
But I'll say that everybody in the region has to work together to create a viable Palestinian state. Until that happens, nobody in the region will have peace and security, unfortunately. Both Jews, Palestinians, and Arabs. There will be, unfortunately, we know this intellectually, nobody, regardless of faith background, will have peace and security in the region. This has been going on for 75 plus years. So when will we help create a process that will bring peace to the region?
So what should Canada say that it's not saying right now, in your mind?
I think we need to first recognize, understand the gravity of what's happening. Mm-hmm. It's abstract to us. We live in peace and security in Canada. It's very, very abstract
but I'm
to us.
talking about the Canadian government.
Yes.
What should it say that it's not saying right now, in your mind?
You know, I'm not gonna stand here and say exactly what the government should be saying, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister. I think you have to ask those questions to the appropriate people. But my duty, I've said it right now. I've shared it right now. There is a humanitarian disaster happening. We are all people. We're all humans. We have to recognize this.
Vous avez dit qu'il faut nommer les choses. Est-ce que Israël commet un crime de guerre, des crimes de guerre?
C'est une bonne question. On doit poser la question.
Je vous la pose.
Un génocide?
Ça, c'est une question qu'on doit poser. Moi, je suis un individu. Oui, je suis un élu de notre Parlement. J'ai une formation en droit et aussi j'étais militaire. Mais je suis seulement un individu. Donc pour moi, de personnellement prononcer ça dans ma capacité comme député, I don't want to do that. But I think we need to ask that question. On doit poser cette question clairement. Et aussi, c'est pour des gens avec l'information complète qui doivent se prononcer sur ça. I was not even aware when standing here about the numbers of people dead. You told me 4 to 5 million. I'm just saying, you guys are journalists. You're on top of this issue. I don't have the full facts in front of me. You know the numbers better than I do. So for me to answer this question, I can't answer these types of questions without the full details in front of me. These are serious legal questions, questions of law and fact.
Mais vous dites de témoigner, vous voyez ce qui se passe quand même, là, je veux dire.
As I said, I don't have the full facts in front of me, but these numbers are mounting by the minute, literally.
Mais quel est le poids du gouvernement dans ce conflit, en fait?
Pardon?
Quel est le poids du gouvernement dans ce conflit à l'international?
C'est une bonne question. Donc, nous sommes un pays de G7. Nous avons des communautés diverses ici, des communautés qui sont touchées par ce conflit dans de nombreuses façons. This is a challenge and a strength. Why is it a challenge? Because it creates a lot of pain, suffering, legitimate feelings that people are experiencing and processing. And people are moving apart. It's an opportunity. À cause de nous avons des communautés qui sont rattachées à le conflit. Donc, we have a lens into the conflict in a way that many other nations don't have. We can understand and process this from different angles. And yes, maybe provide some solutions and some clarity on facts and law. So we have to harness that opportunity.
S'il y a une chose qui manque dans la réponse du gouvernement jusqu'à présent, les commentaires publics, qu'est-ce que c'est selon vous, dans le message du gouvernement canadien?
Things are moving so fast. It's hard to keep up. Even myself that I'm seized, je suis saisi par cette question, par les nouvelles. Mais moi-même, je ne connais pas les chiffres. I don't know the exact number of people that have died. I know that it's massive. I know this is not the end. We are only just buckling up our seatbelts. What does that mean? We buckle our seatbelts and 1 out of 500 people are dead. At what point does this nightmarish car ride end? How many passengers are going to die? Because people at the wheel aren't holding it properly.
Allez-vous demander de prendre la parole lors de la réunion du caucus pour tenir ce discours-là devant vos collègues?
I'm sharing with everybody here today. Do you think I need another platform? Although I will take every platform that is offered to me.
What do you think of the demonstrations we've seen in your community, Montreal, where you represent, these protesters saying they're on the side of pro-Palestine, but a lot of members of the Jewish community saying they're promoting anti-Semitism and celebrating Hamas's attacks? What do you make of these demonstrations?
Our government and myself have been extremely clear that Hamas's attacks were abhorrent and caused this moment we're in, escalated the situation. There were deaths before happening. Make no mistake. 200 Palestinians had died within the last year So we can't make, we know that these are facts. These are facts. We live in a democracy. Freedom of expression, association are enshrined in the Charter. These are Charter rights. We also have limits, legal limits on freedom of expression. Legal limits. It's important for Canadians to express themselves. That debate might be rambunctious, it might be challenging, it might be uncomfortable. That's completely legitimate. Discomfort in debate, it's part of the rules. It's part of, like, the conversation. But there are bounds beyond that. So, in principle, I support the idea that people can express themselves on the streets, in the halls of power, in civil society. And while people are doing so, it is critical that people understand the limits. My own sister-in-law was going to school, bringing my niece, 9-year-old niece, to school. She was accosted on Monday. 2 people gave her the middle finger, different people, not in the same group. They followed her. She did not make it, neither did her daughter make it to school that Monday, this Monday. That is unacceptable expression of speech. Unacceptable expression of speech. Why did that happen to her? She's the only member of my family that is visibly Muslim if you look at her.
Do you think it's acceptable that protesters protest in front of an event in Ottawa that was about combating anti-Semitism? Is that acceptable?
I'm hearing about it from you right now. I've given my answer on my views of freedom of expression, association, and the limits of it.
How do we bring the temperature down here? Clearly, the emotions are high everywhere, but we've seen what's happened and we've seen the responses. How do we bring the temperature down here so that both Jews and Muslims in Canada can be protected, Palestinians in particular?
It's difficult for people to think about that, but it's an extremely important thing in times of conflict. I've been to Jerusalem and the West Bank and to Israel. I've been to the region. I spent 2 weeks there. That was 5.5 years ago. I went there through a bridge building between Jews and Muslims. Jews within the mainstream of Israeli society, not in the fringes, on the mainstream, within the mainstream of Israeli society. What I saw while I was there 5.5 years ago, in a time of peace, there was a tension in the air. Jerusalem is a beautiful city. There's spirituality, people, 3 different peoples, 3 different faith groups seeking the same thing, spirituality. And there's a tension in the air. Both are currents moving throughout the city at the same time. But what I noticed while there, that there were few people who were standing together, bringing society together. Few. It's very difficult in these times of stress and tension. And people don't like me talking about this sometimes, because people just want to hear themselves validated. He said, she said, they did, this person did, that group started, didn't. This date, these numbers, hospital destroyed by so-and-so. This, for me, these are questions that should be debated. But we need to have people who are courageous, who lean into the conversation, right? Not like wrecking balls, but lean into the conversation and take the hits and are nudging it in the right direction.
Is that what you're trying to do today?
100%.
Is that what Mr. Trudeau is doing?
Yes. And I would ask Canadians to look at his speech on Monday. And I'm sure that won't be the last comment that we'll hear from the PM, because I'm sure you'll be having conversation with him over here and elsewhere. I'll let you guys go. Thank you very much.
Thank you for stopping.
Can I ask you about the hospital? A lot of years actually happened.
we've got President Biden coming out and saying that he's playing the other side, the other team. What do you make of what's going on?
I think any bombing of a hospital is a tragedy. I think we have to protect civilians as much as possible, and I don't have access to the same intelligence that to know what happened, but if President Biden says that it was the other side, well, I mean, President Biden does have access to that intelligence.
Concernant le cessez-le-feu, M. Housefather, le NPD demande ça, des gens de votre caucus aussi demandent ça. Vous en pensez quoi?
Moi, je pense qu'Israël a le droit de se défendre. Israël a été attaqué par un groupe terroriste et je ne vois pas beaucoup des pays qui ont un groupe terroriste qui a comme leur définition un désir d'exterminer le pays et aussi d'exterminer la population juive partout, qu'Israël ne va pas se défendre. Il doit se défendre, mais en utilisant le droit international.
Donc, vous croyez la version...
I thought the Stop Anti-Semitism event that I was at as well was an excellent event. It brought together Jewish community leaders from across the country. And I think it's very important to say that you shouldn't be protesting about what's happening in the Middle East at a Jewish community event. This was a Jewish community event to stop anti-Semitism. It seems like a strange place to have a protest, about what's happening in the Middle East. And I think we in Canada, Jews and Muslims are all feeling very vulnerable, and we need to try to make sure that we don't add to that vulnerability, and I think that added to the vulnerability.
Donc, à propos de l'hôpital, vous avez tendance à croire davantage la version du gouvernement israélien, contrairement à ce que disait M. Trudeau hier, qui lui semblait blâmer le gouvernement israélien.
Je ne crois pas que M. Trudeau a attribué de blâme. Il a dit que nous tous croyons qu'un bombardement d'un hôpital est complètement inacceptable et il faut l'éviter le plus possible. Mais moi, je n'ai pas l'accès à l'intelligence. M. Biden, le président des États-Unis, a l'accès à le plus d'intelligence de presque personne dans le monde. Et lui, il a dit que c'est pas Israël, dont je lui crois.
Is enough? There's still 2 Canadians who are missing in Israel. Is enough being done, do you find, to be putting these missing people and hostages at the top of the agenda?
I think that we are asking very, very clearly that the hostages have to be returned, and I think we've sent a team of experts to help Israel, and I can assure you that we're supporting the Canadian families of anybody we know who is missing. I've done so directly as much as I can. Thanks, guys.
Is there any divided caucus right now? There's been a couple of caucus members that have called for a ceasefire and for Israel to end the siege. Do you feel like there's a message you want to send to those caucus colleagues?
Well, if I want to send a message to my caucus colleagues, I'll talk to them. We're talking in caucus. We're a party where we have people from all over the country with different views and different perspectives. But I think the government's position on this has been pretty clear that Israel is our ally, our friend, and it has the right to defend itself with international law. Thanks so much, everybody.
Do you think Mr. Trudeau is having the right tone right now?
I think it's sad for humanity, what is going on. And history shows that violence has never solved any problem. All parties must go back to dialogues. Dialogues and find solutions.
Do you think
it's
you find
sad.
solutions without a ceasefire?
Ceasefire must be called. It's a sad. Yesterday, what happened? Bombing on a hospital. It's heartbreaking.
But what do you think of Mr. Trudeau's position? Do you think it's criticizing enough both sides and not just one side?
Look, I think it's innocent lives are lost from both sides, and it's been happening for a long time. We all need to stand up and ask for the just solution for everyone, so all can live with peace side by side.
How could Canada do that? Because Canada's position is also that Israel has a right to defend itself and defend its borders, and some see a call for a ceasefire as undermining that position of Israel's right to defend itself.
Canada has been a champion of peacemaking and humanitarian laws, international law. I think we should call for that. Everyone should respect international law.
Do you think Israel is respecting international law right now?
International laws are not being respected by anyone, whether it's Hamas, whether it's other parties.
Including Israel. I just want to be
course.
clear on your thoughts.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
bombing hospitals, civilian, that's from anyone. That's not respecting the international laws.
And to be clear, just if we discovered the hospital wasn't bombed by Israel, are they still not respecting international law?
But are the civilians being killed, being targeted? So you have to find out.
It doesn't matter who dropped that bomb. It still doesn't matter where that bomb came from. It's still breaking the law.
Look, someone is dropping bombs, and they're breaking international laws. Like it's dropping bomb on civilian in the hospitals and the kids, women, children. I think it's.
The idea of a ceasefire, could you expand on it?
I just gave you my thought. I just said it's dialogues are the only way to have a peace.
But with or without ceasefire?
Sorry?
With or without a ceasefire?
How a ceasefire will happen if you don't start negotiations in the parties?
It doesn't appear Israel is responsible for yesterday's hospital strike.
I think I would have to dig more deeply into it. There's so much information coming out right now that doesn't seem to give a very clear answer on what's happened, who's responsible. So I'm just going to keep monitoring. It's irresponsible of me to comment without having done my due diligence.
The idea of a ceasefire, what do you think of that?
Sorry?
The ceasefire idea that they're discussing.
Yeah, I think the issue right now in talking about a ceasefire, which obviously would lend itself to a result that we all want eventually, which is peace. The issue is that Hamas is still harboring hostages that it took from Israel during the attack. That's one issue. The second is Israel has a right to defend itself, and in part of that defense, it means helping deal with the structure of the current Hamas regime. If that regime is not dealt with, then as time goes by, they will simply rebuild, they will rebuild stronger, and Israel will be at threat again. So although we all want an end to this conflict as quickly as possible, there are steps that need to take place, and unfortunately, there are going to be casualties on both sides of this really devastating conflict.
How damaging do you think what happened yesterday was, regardless of who's responsible for it?
It's damaging because 500 plus people lost their lives.
But I mean damaging to any sort of a resolution to this. I mean, already we've seen that it's affected the president's visit.
Yeah. This conflict is going to every day have a new element and a new dynamic to it that is going to make it exceptionally difficult to deal with. There are going to be more deaths. There's going to be more people that are wounded, and the trauma is going to compound, and the impact on communities will increase. So I think we have to remember that this conflict is evolving. This is not the end of it, unfortunately, and there are going to be changing dynamics as the time goes by.
Do you know anything about any Boston negotiations that I know mentioned that they were sending an expert? Have you received any updates?
No, you have to direct those to Minister Joly. Yeah. Thank you.
Monsieur McGuinty, avez-vous 2 secondes pour nous parler de ce qui se passe en Israël présentement? Qui doit-on croire en ce moment quand vient le temps de parler de ce qui s'est passé à l'hôpital de Gaza?
C'est impossible pour moi de répondre. Je n'ai pas accès aux renseignements.
À ce moment-là, est-ce que le premier ministre aurait dû être plus prudent dans ses déclarations d'hier?
J'ai une confiance complète dans le premier ministre vis-à-vis de cette situation extrêmement difficile et tragique.
Et quand M. Biden, lui, se range complètement du côté d'Israël, que devrait faire le Canada?
J'ai beaucoup de confiance dans le président des États-Unis. C'est une situation explosive. C'est une situation qui est très difficile à prédire. Et je pense qu'il faut être très discipliné. Et j'ai beaucoup de confiance en le premier ministre.
À ce moment-là, il y a 2 versions contradictoires.
Je ne suis pas en mesure de prendre une décision d'un côté ou l'autre. Je pense qu'il faut attendre. Je pense qu'il faut attendre les gens qui sont là, les experts, pour éventuellement informer la population globale.
L'idée d'un cessez-le-feu, qu'est-ce que vous en pensez? Les gens de votre caucus ont demandé ça.
On va en discuter, je suis certain. Mais j'ai beaucoup de confiance dans le Premier ministre. Et Mme Joly aussi.
Do you think Canada needs... I'm curious what you think of what's happening now. Do we need a ceasefire? Is that sort of the next step that has to happen in what's going on in the Middle East?
So obviously we are all deeply concerned, and many communities across the country are deeply concerned about the continuing violence in the region. We're monitoring closely. Our focus is still on the release of hostages, getting humanitarian aid to those in Gaza so that they can get to safety, and ensuring that we don't see more loss of life at this time.
Do you have any concerns about that protest ending up outside the conference on anti-Semitism yesterday? Was that an appropriate venue for it to be protesting?
So the right to protest in this country is a freedom that we all have a privilege to enjoy here. What I will say is that we need to be mindful that communities are hurting right now. So many communities are impacted by this. For many, it's quite personal with family members overseas. I think there's a time and a place to express concern about the escalating violence in the region, but it's also to be mindful that there are many communities that are in trauma right now, Muslim communities, Jewish communities, and that there's a time and a place to express those concerns in that pain. Thank you.
The Prime Minister, Sam?
What would you like to know, Ryan?
I'm just wondering what do you think the Prime Minister was trying to get across there?
I think the Prime Minister was really clear with his letter that we've all been tasked as ministers to make sure that Canadian pensioners know that their pensions are going to be there after a life of hard work. And from my perspective as Alberta Minister in Cabinet, this is a massive distraction on the part of the Alberta government. And it's going to take a whole year for this thing to resolve. I can tell you I have hundreds of emails, and when I'm out in the community, people are saying, what can the Canadian government do to keep pensions in Canadians' hands? And the Prime Minister's letter said we'll do everything we can to do that.
You're an Alberta MP, though. The revenues from an Alberta pension plan could be significant. Albertans could potentially pay less in contributions and receive higher payouts. Isn't there some benefit to Albertans for this?
I don't buy the math on that argument, Ryan. I think the report was flawed, and I think the numbers are going to need to be crunched very carefully over the next year. And quite frankly, if Alberta pulls out of the CPP, it'd be stabilizing for Canadians from coast to coast to coast, which is also a problem. And look, let's see what happens the first time that Premier Smith gets around the table of the Council of the Confederation, because I think other premiers have already been very clear that this is not a good idea. And I can tell you, Albertans have lots on their plate right now. Messing around with the pensions, politicizing pensions, not a good idea.
Mais pourquoi le Premier ministre veut envoyer cette lettre-là? Ça sert à quoi présentement d'envoyer cette lettre-là?
C'est le Premier ministre du Canada.
Oui, mais pourquoi chicaner avec l'Alberta là-dessus?
C'est pas une chicane, c'est un commentaire très clair que si quelconque province veut se retirer du régime pension du Canadien, on va faire tout ce qu'on peut faire pour défendre les intérêts des Canadiens. Et en ce qui concerne les Albertains qui sont fiers participants du régime du pension du Canada, pour moi, c'est une distraction pure et claire du gouvernement de l'Alberta de ces autres problèmes. Et les Albertains ont beaucoup de pain sur la planche. C'est pas le moment de politiser les pensions.
Mais ce droit-là existe, non?
Sur le NPD qui, disons, à son congrès a menacé, a brandi la menace d'un retrait de l'entente avec les libéraux. Est-ce que vous croyez que cette menace-là, elle est sérieuse? Est-ce que c'est vraiment une possibilité? Puis est-ce que vous, du côté du gouvernement, vous êtes prêts à accepter, à mettre de l'eau dans votre vin sur l'assurance médicaments, à accepter tout ce qu'ils veulent? Donc une assurance médicaments publique et universelle.
Beaucoup de questions dans une question. Mais regarde, on prend toujours le MPD à leur parole. Et je pense que ce qui est important, ce sont les négociations qu'on a entre ministre Holland et Don Davies et les chefs sur cette question. Donc, on est en pleine négociation. L'entente qu'on a avec le MPD fonctionne pour le moment. Et quand je parle aux gens à Edmonton et Alberta, la stabilité qu'on a avec cette entente, ça marche pour eux, ça marche pour nous. Donc, on va continuer à avoir des négociations.
So you guys haven't decided then, or haven't created a new offer in terms of what the program might look like?
We'll see what conversations yield. But I'm not at a point where I'm ready to offer something concrete at this point.
Monsieur Holland, vous avez parlé précédemment de ça peut être une décision aussi fiscale. Quelle est la capacité des contribuables de payer pour un système public et universel?
Oui, c'est absolument
Est-ce que c'est quelque chose que vous voulez aborder, cette question-là, ces préoccupations-là, avec M. Davies?
Oui, absolument. C'est clair dans notre conversation que le coût du programme, c'est important de s'assurer que le coût n'était pas une grosse dépense, parce que c'est pas une situation fiscale actuellement, aujourd'hui, où notre système peut c'est le bon d'idée pour ça, c'est par là.
Est-ce que vous avez, juste parce que je veux savoir, vous êtes rendu où dans le cheminement de cette réflexion-là, est-ce que vous êtes en train d'avoir des discussions avec la ministre des Finances, la ministre Freeland, pour savoir c'est quoi la marge de manœuvre, justement?
Oui, c'est clair. Au début, c'est important de réaliser qu'est-ce que c'est la meilleure option, le meilleur système à l'avenir. Et c'est pas nécessairement aujourd'hui, parce que le coût d'un système, peut-être, c'est vraiment vaste. Alors, absolument, je parlais avec ministre Freeland sur le coût de le programme et avec la situation actuelle, généralement. Et c'est important dans notre conversation avec l'MPD de s'assurer que la situation fiscale est une partie de la conversation.
Le fait que le Québec aimerait avoir, comme dit M. Legault, une pleine compensation financière, est-ce que ça change votre façon d'approcher l'entente avec le NPD, la négociation?
Oui, c'est clair que n'importe quel système doit considérer les provinces et le territoire. Et il y a des systèmes actuels dans les provinces de Québec maintenant, par exemple. Et quand je parle avec le ministre Dubé, c'est clair que le système fédéral doit coopérer avec les provinces et considérer le système actuel. Et alors, même si après il y a une entente avec l'NPD, il va y avoir beaucoup de conversations avec les provinces et territoires.
Comment on fait pour avoir une entente qui va coûter très cher alors que le gouvernement surveille l'argent qu'il dépense? C'est comme ces deux choses qui se peuvent pas ensemble.
Oui, c'est pas facile. Oui, alors ça c'est la raison pour laquelle on doit avoir une conversation qui va prendre le temps avec l'NPD, avec les autres députés, de chercher pour le meilleur système. Et c'est une question complexe.
They say this is a slam dunk, that single-payer universal pharmacare is a no-brainer in their view, that it would end up saving money even if there be more cost on the federal ledger, but in the big picture, it provides savings to Canadians and to governments, frees up room in provincial health budgets, and is good for everybody. It was recommended by the Hoskins report. Your own party has called for it several times. Middle of my question. Called for it several times.
I know where you're going.
So why are you guys not?
Well, let's first of all take bulk purchasing. We've already worked with provinces and territories to save $3.5 billion in reducing drug costs for Canadians through bulk purchasing. So a lot of the bulk purchasing savings have already been realized. Secondly, we have to make sure that the system that comes doesn't take all of the responsibility off the shoulders of provinces and private insurers and dump it onto the fiscal framework of the federal government. So there has to be an agreement with the provinces and territories and as well with private insurers and to make sure that those costs don't just get dumped on taxpayers. And there are fair and very legitimate questions about how that would happen. There are fair and very legitimate questions about how provinces and territories would be treated fairly, about how we would ensure that businesses wouldn't be unduly burdened by this, and that the fiscal framework is kept solid. So look, it's very easy on the back of napkins to say things are simple and slam dunks, but when you actually look at the complexity of the existing programs, I think people would recognize this is an extremely complicated space, and that we have to proceed prudently, that we have to do so with deliberation, and that yes, that means it's not going to be as fast as people like.
Monsieur le ministre, sur un complément au sujet, l'entente en santé sur les transferts en santé avec le Québec, je sais que les discussions se poursuivent, mais là, ça va faire presque un an, février, que Québec a dit oui, on est d'accord, mais que vous négociez les détails encore. Alors, est-ce que vous pouvez juste donner une explication de pourquoi ça prend autant
Ça prend beaucoup de temps comme ça.
Ouais.
Oui, c'est évident avec notre entente avec la Colombie-Britannique. C'est là. La semaine dernière, on a lancé les tentes avec les Colombie-Britanniques et tous les détails est là. C'était vraiment quelque chose de complexe. D'expliquer pas juste l'argent, mais le type de changement qui est possible et aussi de s'assurer que les données est là pour les personnes de voir visiblement que l'augmentation chaque année dans le système est évidente dans le données. Et alors, je comprends que les personnes, certainement moi aussi, veulent que le temps arrive bientôt. Et certainement, pour certaines provinces, ça va être le cas. Il va y avoir beaucoup d'attentes avec les autres provinces. Et les négociations avec Québec, ça continue. Je comprends que Québec a des questions, mais c'est vraiment pour moi pas une question de juridiction, pas de tout. C'est vraiment une question de la visibilité de notre investissement d'argent dans le système. Qu'est-ce que c'est le résultat de ça? Et aussi pour les Québécois et les Québécoises, de s'assurer que les résultats sont visibles. Et ça, c'est notre objectif. Là. OK, merci beaucoup.
Je veux juste savoir, parce que le 170 millions, je pense que Patrimoine canadien estime pouvoir avoir de Google l'estimation que ça représenterait quoi la part que Google donnerait en indemnisation aux médias. Si, par exemple, il y a deux choses, il y a C18 et il y a aussi un fonds. OK, les deux coexistent ensemble. Si ça arrive, est-ce que le calcul du total pourrait être différent de la contribution? Je ne sais pas si vous comprenez ma question. Non? Non? OK, je m'excuse, c'est compliqué, je vais prendre le temps. Donc, OK, Patrimoine canadien a une estimation de combien Google pourrait donner en indemnisation aux médias à travers toutes ces ententes quand C18 va entrer en vigueur en décembre, comme c'est prévu. Là, Google aussi et d'autres veulent un fonds pour les médias. Vous n'avez pas fermé la porte à ça, mais vous ne reculez pas en même temps. Ça, j'ai compris sur C18. Donc, les deux pourraient peut-être coexister là, si on suit cette logique-là. Et le fonds et les contributions. Donc, Google pourrait verser de l'argent dans un fonds et avec des ententes d'indemnisation. Est-ce que le total de ce que Google...
Je pense que là, on est rendu trop loin sur les aspects techniques parce que on est encore à l'étape d'analyser les commentaires que Google a fait puis de chercher la voie de passage pour répondre aux interrogations de Google. Parmi les interrogations de Google, il y a la question de combien ça va me coûter. Oui. Et que ce qu'il souhaite savoir, c'est le maximum que ça va lui coûter. Puis il estime que dans ce qu'il y a sur la table présentement, que ça ne répond pas à cette question-là. Puis la deuxième chose, il veut s'assurer que la voie vers une exemption du processus d'arbitrage est claire pour eux. Et c'est là-dessus qu'on travaille pour trouver la voie de passage. On parle autant avec nos partenaires du côté des médias qu'avec Google, puis avec les autres partenaires là, pour trouver la bonne solution.
Quand Google dit ça va nous coûter 2 fois plus cher, quand Google dit ça va nous coûter 2 fois plus cher que ce qu'on pensait, est-ce que vous êtes d'accord avec leur calcul?
Bien, encore une fois, on travaille sur la proposition finale qui va être publiée du côté de la réglementation, puis on est dans la phase de prendre en considération les préoccupations de Google.
Special Representative for Islamophobia works out of your department, Heritage, and she has not said anything publicly about the rising rates of Islamophobia that are happening right now in the wake of the conflict in the Middle East. Why is that?
I think that you should send your questions to her office.
She's not saying why.
Okay, well, it's still like she has a job to do. I know that she's working on the question with also the new person that was nominated around anti-Semitism. But you really need to redirect your question.
Merci.
En français là-dessus, Madame Sainton.
My colleagues at the House wanted to ask you that the PBO has released a new higher estimate on how much revenue your proposed digital services tax could bring in, but is it worth the anger and the potential retaliation from the U.S.?
Well, this is an issue that I've talked to my U.S. counterparts about. Minister Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister, has been working on this. We've been very clear to the Canadian people that big tech should be paying their fair of taxes to their share. Gosh, I knew that it was not F, but S.
You got there.
Their share of taxes. But look, I mean, this is part of an OECD agreement that we have done around the world that Minister Freeland and Treasury Secretary Yellen has done, and and this is an obligation that we have made to Canadians.
So you think it's worth a possible retaliation?
Well, I'm not going to guess where things are going to go, but I will continue to work with my U.S. colleague. This relationship and the trade relationship is an extremely important one, and I think what you see us do all the time is work with our U.S. partner to find ways that ultimately is good for Canadians. That's what I do every day.
Minister, could we see any news about that, any new development in the fiscal update that is upcoming? Is that a possibility?
Well, I don't want to foreshadow or to give you information that is not factual or correct. So when we have more to say, we will.
Minister, about Google and Meta, for example, and the deal we're trying to do. What kind of pushback are you getting from your counterpart in the United States about that?
My counterpart and I have not talked about that. We've talked about a lot of other things. I will see her at the G7 in about a little over a week from now. And there's a lot of work that we need to do as G7 colleagues. And on trade, for example, there's a lot of work that we need to do to continue to drive economic competitiveness here between us and the United States, particularly in the green economy, particularly in areas where where we're building those really important domestic supply chains here that get into global value chains in the United States. Thanks so much.
I think that there's a lot of
payer 40% de la facture, peu importe la facture totale.
Le gouvernement canadien, avec l'entente qu'on a signée en 2017, a déjà sécurisé avec la contribution du gouvernement du Québec et de la Ville de Québec 4 milliards de dollars. C'est le dernier montant estimé par la Ville de Québec à ce jour. Il y aura dans quelques semaines un nouveau montant qui va être produit. On sait que ça va être plus que 4 milliards de dollars. La bonne nouvelle, c'est qu'à partir de 2026, il va y avoir déjà dans le cadre fiscal un investissement de 3 milliards de dollars récurrents annuels additionnels aux 4 milliards qui existent déjà. Donc on sait que le gouvernement canadien va être disponible et disposé à financer des dépassements de coûts à partir du moment où ce sera nécessaire. Et ce qu'il faut faire maintenant, c'est attendre que la Ville de Québec produise ces nouveaux estimés de coûts pour pouvoir aller.
Donc, peu importe le coût, ce sera 40% défrayé par le fédéral. C'est ce que je comprends. Traditionnellement,
c'est 40%. Dans d'autres provinces, c'est moins. Au Québec, et à Québec, ça a toujours été 40%. Est-ce que ça risque fort probablement d'être encore 40%?
Même si le dépassement de coût, parce qu'on ne sait pas ça va être quoi la facture, là, si le dépassement de coût devrait être le double, le triple de ce qui était prévu, c'est 40% quand même, vous engagez quand même à...
Mais comment ça fonctionne? C'est que le gouvernement du Québec a besoin de statuer sur ce que lui juge utile d'investir dans le projet de tramway. Jusqu'à maintenant, on a toujours été disposé à assumer la part du gouvernement canadien, mais ça passe toujours par le gouvernement du Québec. C'est la Ville qui fait une demande au gouvernement du Québec, qui ensuite fait une demande au gouvernement du Canada.
Si c'est priorisé, ce sera accepté par
tout à fait.
L'idée de cessez-le-feu, il y a des gens du caucus qui en parlent, de votre caucus, là, qui veulent un cessez-le-feu entre la Hamas, entre Israël. Vous en pensez quoi de ça?
Ben, c'est terrible ce qui se passe pour les civils. Dans toute guerre, ce sont presque tout le temps les civils qui en souffrent davantage. C'est à la fois les civils israéliens et les civils palestiniens. Toute mesure qui pourrait amener à réduire le fardeau, la souffrance que vivent les familles en Palestine et en Israël est une mesure qui doit être considérée. C'est pour ça que Mme Joly est en conversation et était même sur place il y a quelques jours à peine, pour s'assurer que les gens soient protégés en Israël et en Palestine.
Donc vous ne seriez pas contre de demander que le Canada demande un cessez-le-feu? C'est ce que demande le NPD, par exemple.
Ben, c'est une conversation qui a cours. Mme Joly fait le travail qu'elle doit faire, et moi je lui fais entièrement confiance.
Juste une question de vous sur le tramway, pour être sûr de bien vous comprendre. Seriez-vous prêt à augmenter la proportion que paierait le gouvernement fédéral advenant qu'un autre ordre de gouvernement plafonne le montant maximal de sa contribution?
Non, le maximum c'est 40%. C'est un maximum qui a déjà été atteint et respecté jusqu'à maintenant avec le gouvernement du Québec pour le projet de tramway. Dans d'autres provinces, dans d'autres projets, le gouvernement fédéral finance parfois moins que 40% parce que la province finance plus que 60%.
Merci, M. Trudeau. Bonne journée.
Is the federal government going to put out its own calculations on what the Canada Pension Plan is worth and what versus the numbers that LifeWorks is putting out and that the Premier is touting?
Well, look, I think the Prime Minister's letter is pretty clear. He's tasked all ministers to make sure that we can defend Albertans and their interest in staying part of the CPP. The overwhelming majority of emails and phone calls that I'm getting are that Albertans want to stay in the CPP. And I guess the question is, why this distraction? Why now? Like, what is it that, is it to take away from the fact that $33 billion has been scared away on renewables because of a pause on renewables? So, look, we're going to do the calculations. That makes sense. I think there are some problems with the math that got us to this point. And the fact that this is going to drag on for a year is deeply destabilizing to Albertans who have other things on their plate. And so it's a huge distraction. Our job is to make sure that people can have confidence in their pension system. Canadians and Albertans have paid into the Canadian pension plan. And it's not just about, Albertans probably being worse off. It's also about Canadians suffering across the country should Alberta go through with pulling Albertans out of the CPP.
Have other premiers asked you to stop this, to shut this idea down? Because, there are 9 other provinces plus the territories.
I think Premier Eby's been pretty clear on this, and I think it'll be a robust conversation for the Premier and other premiers the next time the Council of the Federation gets together.
And the open letter from the Prime Minister, what is the basic, for broadcast, what is the basic message that this open letter is trying to say?
The Prime Minister is really clear and basically saying the Canada Pension Plan works. Canadians have paid into the pension plan, Albertans have paid into the pension plan, and after a lifetime of hard work, they want to know that the pension plan is going to be there. And one of the best things we did as a government early in our mandate was to stabilize the CPP for generations. And I got feedback from that from my own riding. And so for the Alberta government to now say, no, we're going to go our own way, when if you take a look just based on the numbers, I think you can take 2020 numbers, a 20% increase in the CPP, the same year that AIMCO lost 0.5%. That's not how I want pension money managed for Albertans. And on another substantive issue, which is the fact that the Canadian pension plan, the board, everything is independent. It's beyond political interference. When the actual terms of AIMCO indicate very clearly that the executive committee, which is the Premier's office, can reach right into the fund, which they did when they actually took money out of the teachers' pension fund.
So do you perceive this as just an idea for talk radio to kick around and for the Premier to...
I think it's a massive distraction, and nobody should be playing politics with pensions.
Je pose des questions. First, brièvement,
oui.
Est-ce que les autres premiers, exceptement Québec, disent arrêter cette idée? C'est fou?
C'est une très bonne question. Je pense que très rapidement, après que la Première ministre Smith a dit qu'elle voulait sortir les Albertains du régime pension canadien, le Premier ministre de la Colombie-Britannique, David Eby, était très clair là-dessus, qui a trouvé que c'était une idée très risquée. Et moi, je pense que pendant la prochaine rencontre du Conseil de la Fédération, que Mme Smith va devoir répondre à plusieurs questions de plusieurs premiers ministres pluriels.
Est-ce qu'à toi faire de notre calculation qui contre les calculations qu'Alberta utilisait dans le discours?
Déjà, les calculs de Trevor Toomby sont très éclaircissants en ce qui concerne les problèmes fondamentaux avec l'analyse que la province a faite. Et donc, nous, côté finances et autres ministères, vont faire le calcul. Mais le message du Premier ministre dans la lettre à Mme Smith, c'est très clair. Les ministres, notre gouvernement, vont être à la défense des Canadiens, des Albertains, et que leur pension soit pérennisée pour le futur.
Et le message de Premier Smith de Ottawa, c'est est-ce que c'est une idée pour discussion sur le radio?
Moi, je pense, oui. Je pense que c'est une distraction complètement pure et simple. Elle est en difficulté parce qu'elle a mis une pause sur l'énergie renouvelable et jusqu'à date, on a 12 milliards de projets qui ont été fermés et un autre 19 milliards de dollars de projets qui sont à risque. Et là, on a une province qui veut attirer l'investissement à travers le monde et ils font un gaffe comme ça. Moi, je pense que la question des pensions, c'est pour eux de changer de canal, mais moi, je ne vais pas changer de canal. Je suis à la défense des Albertains.
In either languages, is there anything I've missed, anything you want to add, anything you want to
No, look, I can tell you what Albertans are telling me to tell to the Premier, hands off my pension. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I just talk briefly about Alberta's pension plan desires? Mr. Boissonnault also stopped, but I'm just sincere that, correct me if I'm wrong, you handle the CPP through the Labour and so on. What's your reaction to what the Premier's trying to do there?
I think, the Prime Minister is right to ask the Premier to reconsider. People got enough going on. The CPP, particularly since we improved it, it's a rock. it's some stability. People are reaching out and holding on to whatever rock they can these days. There's just so much going on, so much volatility. We don't need more volatility in the Canada Pension Plan. It is rock solid. I reminded people in the House yesterday that when former Prime Minister Harper announced at Davos that they were considering it would be conservative policy to increase the retirement age to 67. He also added, stay away from CPP. Don't touch CPP. I imagine the Conservative caucus must be looking at that themselves. They challenge them on it. It is stable. It is real. It is there for people. That's what people need right now. That's what seniors are counting on.
And are you hearing anything from Premier Fury or other premiers saying, come on, Ottawa, shut this down? Or is it something for the Council of Federation to deal with?
Yeah, I would imagine I'll allow premiers to speak with premiers, and have their opinions on that. I just know, from the federal government's point of view, we did a lot of work to improve the Canada Pension Plan and to make sure that it remained viable and solvable, and leave it be. We need more sure things right now in this world.
Thank you for stopping.
Thanks, Chris. Good to see you.
Good to see you.